African art. She visited Morocco, I guess Fez.
I was in Fez.
You were in Fez this summer and participated in the Arabic language in Fez program, an Arabic language immersion program, and is going to talk to us about that. Sorry, and did I say your name? It was Sarah Sharp. I'm very sorry.
Hi, so I'm Sarah Sharp, and I lived in Fez, Morocco over the summer studying at the American Language Institute in Fez. And the reason why I chose to participate at ALIF is that I needed a structured curriculum. I'm not a person who fully immerses myself into a language and picks it up. And so that I liked the curriculum that they offered. And number two, that they use the same textbooks that the Howard University uses. So I was just able to continue with what I had started here. I went to Fez with about 3 months of Arabic under my belt, so I was very much a beginner. And I had the anxiety of going into an area where I didn't speak the language, didn't know the script, and even though many people in Morocco speak French, I don't speak French at all. So I had the fun experience of trying to communicate in the language I was learning and constantly being responded in French and just being confused 90% of the time, but at the same time I was always developing and learning. So I'm going to give a short history just on Fez. It's a very historic city in Morocco. As far as the 2004 census, it is the fourth largest city in Morocco with close to 1 million people. It is one of the former capitals of Morocco. The capital has changed numerous times. The city is divided into 3 sections. We have Fez Valley and Fez Jadid, which are part of the walled old city, and then the Villeneuve, which is the French-developed portion of the city. The school was located in Villeneuve, and I lived in the Medina. I call the old city the Medina. And right here is just an image of Fez from the top of the Marianetta tombs. And you can see the wall of the old city. Within the old city, the city was divided into 5 different sections, and in each section you had a bakery, a mosque, a fountain, and a hammam. And you could always see the steeples of the mosque from pretty much any vantage point of the city. And one of the main historic sites there is the University of Al-Akarian. I'm going to mess that up, sorry about that. This is one of the main sites of the city. It's a historic university built in 859, and it has left its legacy on Fez, and it's considered one of the spiritual, cultural centers of the Muslim world. And I also didn't mention that the Medina there is a UNESCO heritage site. So by day I was a student. I was in class for 4 hours a day, and I was a little bit behind in my program, so I ended up doing 2 hours of tutoring work a day. So I was in class from 4 to 6, Monday through Friday, and by the time class let up, I was a tourist. I just wandered the city, shopping, seeing the sights. On the weekends, I would do weekend day trips. And the city of Fez, the tanneries are very much of the tradition. I think that's what I have next. They're still employing techniques. It dates back to the 9th century. The techniques that they're using there haven't changed since the 11th century. We never got right into the pits to go see, but you could sit down and look from afar. And it's quite an elaborate process. It has a distinct smell that kind of lingers throughout the city. You're just very aware that the tanneries exist, and on the hot days, it's very apparent. The riads is a traditional style of architecture, and we had one that was available for us to go and hang out at in my neighborhood. And the architecture is structured, so you have a courtyard, not very many windows to the outside, 3 to 4 stories in height. The main floors would be constructed with marble and tile, and people would hang out on the main floor during the summertime. The marble and tile would keep the building cooler, and they'd have a fountain to help keep the building cool. The second and upper floors were wood, and that's where the families would hang out during the winter time, and the wood would keep the warmth in the building. Some of the weekend trips that I did. I went out to Sela one weekend, a beautiful coastal town on the Atlantic. And their Medina, very much a different feel to the city. Whitewashed, blue shutters. It wasn't as crowded. When I showed up there, they had a lot more light art, nightlife. There was a festival going on with music. There was a lot of galleries in the town. It had a very different feel. I didn't have enough time to really sit down and explore, and it's a city I think deserves more attention. Another trip that we did was to Taza, and they have one of the largest caving systems in North Africa there. And just an adventure caving. I'll show a picture later on. Meknes, which is another former capital, which is about 45 minutes outside of Fez. Another historic city. We did do a trip to the Sahara. Some of these trips were school-sponsored through Aleph, and some we just took them and did independently. The Sahara was a little bit more of an extensive trip that they put together for us. And we went out and spent a couple nights in the desert. And then Ifron is another city which is about 40 minutes from us. It's at the base of the Atlas Mountains. And it's known that's where people go ski in Morocco. And they have a very prestigious university in Ifron. Let's see, this next slide, this is Sheshau, Sela, the coastal town. So I know I didn't get a good picture of the inside of Fez, but a lot of the brown brick building, and then you have the whitewash, so just a very different feeling. Some of the mural work that was through the city. And then this is the beach. We're on the beach, and we asked to get transportation to the beach, and we got a donkey. It was kind of just a fun little note, and of course traffic was passing us along the road. Next is Taza. This was where we are, where the person is right now. We're at the entry to the cave, so we had to climb down, and then it was probably about a 45-minute hike in, and then we entered the caves, and it was probably the most intensive caving I've ever done. We were muddy, we were crawling through stalagmites, and we had a great guide that was willing to deal with us because we were scared 90% of the time. I just put some information on Aleph, their email address, and they are part of the American Cultural Association. And so the American Cultural Association is a conglomeration of language schools. Aleph in particular, from what they told us, is the only school that offers Arabic to foreigners, so mainly it's an institution to teach English. One highlight that was going on while I was there was the referendum to the Constitution. My first night in Morocco, we were sitting in a cafe, and all of a sudden, like a parade of celebrations were starting. Nobody really knew what was happening. So we started talking to people. They were celebrating that these referendums were going to be taking place, or they're going to be voting on it. And every Sunday, they have protests in the town squares where people just get together, and with the referendums taking place, they were up until July 1st. They were very active, very well. There was a good turnout. Then they continued even after the election. So that's just part of what took place daily there. And I'm not going to read all the changes. I can leave this up for a few moments and you can look over, but these are just some of the changes that the referendums were addressing. And does anybody have any questions?
Did these pass?
Yeah, these were all passed.
These were passed?
Yes. These were the referendums that were. As far as from what, through the dialogues that I was having with my faculty.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did your trip influence your research, your future research goals? I want to get your take on the art scene there.
Yeah.
I see the last thing says also.
Yeah. You know, the town I was in, it didn't have a whole lot going on as far as art outreach. They had the cultural center, which I wasn't able to talk to any officials there. And then I was able to, we had one gallery. And so as far as doing a lot of research, I wasn't in the right city for it. I'd like to go back. Scylla had quite a bit going on, and I know Tangier has quite a bit.
many other students were there on the
On
trip?
it.
Yeah, with
This
Yeah.
year, they said because of everything that was taking place, that was their best attended year to date, but it's probably about 63.
63?
What the number was.
I'm sorry, were you the only student there where English was the only fluent language that you speak?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, not at all. There was
They were all Americans? Or most?
95% of the people were American.
And only spoke English?
Oh, as far as the,
Yeah, as their primary.
as the 95% of the people. Yeah. There are there's a group from France, there are a few people from Mexico, Sweden, but a couple from Italy.
Is Morocco is Morocco going to be the focus of your dissertation
Most likely
research?
not.
Most likely not. Okay, so you pretty much went there to.
So I was there specifically learning language.
How do you feel about your Arabic? And if you were to suggest to the program management what they could perhaps improve as far as your experience, specifically your learning of the Arabic language?
My current learning curve there was incredible. I came back here and I feel really confident with what I learned. I think my issues are more with the textbook actually than the program. You get the textbook, you realize the direction that the text is taking you in.
Where I'm coming from that, having done a study abroad program too, I did one in France.
Mhm.
I stayed with a French family,
Yeah.
which helped me better,
Mhm.
basically immersed me into the language. So, do you think you got adequate immersion staying with other Americans, fellow English speakers?
Oh,
Or
as
perhaps-
far as
Yeah, or
that element, I think I missed out a little bit by not staying with, I missed out a lot by not staying with my family.
is that allowed?
I stayed in an apartment with 2 other students.
Is that an option? Do they arrange?
They do have home now. They do home stays, and I would say that would be one of the things that I would look back on and be like, I should have done a home stay. And we did have the difference between the colloquial dialect and what we were learning was dramatically different. And so that would, for many of the people who were doing the home stay, they come into class and they have all this vocabulary that they're working with, and then they'd be like, that's not what we're learning right now. We need to reformat what you're practicing for the academics. So I did miss out a lot by not doing the home stay. I don't know if I might have confused myself more too. Languages are not I know where my weaknesses are.
Other questions? Well, thank you
Okay.
very much. And next on our agenda, we're now, I guess, moving from the graduate students to the undergraduate students, perhaps. We have 2 excellent seniors, actually, African Studies majors, who are here to present their summer experiences. First up is Ms. Yejide Olutosin, who is an African Studies major, will be graduating in May, and was a Gilman Fellow, right? They're scholars, or what they would call them, a Gilman Scholar, in Senegal this summer. And I guess was based at Suffolk University in Dakar. Their campus there in Dakar in June and July of this year, and is going to talk to us about her experiences there.
Hello. Like she said, my name is Yejide Olutosin. I spent 2 months this summer in Dakar. I actually lived with a homestay family in Mermoz, and I can really identify with some of the things that you were talking about as far as the cultural divide and learning how to adapt to a very different society. But I loved it. I wish I had maybe done the semester version and Howard would let me, but I definitely am planning on going back. I actually was at the Suffolk University. I took a politics and Africa class, and I took a Wolof 1 class. So I was in class for 4 hours every day, and then there was a lunch break, and then Wolof for 2 hours, and then of course I was in a homestay, and my homestay mother did not speak French nor English, so lots of sign language first couple of weeks because I knew no Wolof. And I'm a French minor, so I was like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna go to Senegal and speak French, and no one spoke French to me. Until you get to like government buildings in downtown. But as far as my homestay, I had 3 little brothers and 1 little sister, and 2 uncles, and it was really interesting seeing like the levels of education by gender and age, the exposure to American culture, and also like because this particular family is used by the program a lot, they have a lot of experience dealing with American students coming to their house. But I would definitely recommend it. I actually did the program through the Cultural International Education Exchange, CIEE. Just Google CIEE. They have undergraduate and graduate programs, and they have like teaching and things like that. So I think everybody in this audience could probably benefit from the program. And like I said before, I got my funding through the Gilman Scholar Program, which is a really great program if you are undergraduate and you're going to a non-Western country. They love it. So as far as my actual experience, like I said, I was there in June and July, so towards the tail end of my experience, I actually witnessed some of the riots, contrary to what my program director wanted us, but it happened. We walked out of the store and actually saw a group of people being gassed. And the second time I was in a taxi, so I don't know if I was a magnet for running into the different places, but I mean, I liked that, not the riots, but I liked the fact that I was able to see it because we were learning about it in class, and my classes were all in French because the professors they came the first day and they were like, we're not speaking English. So, and one of our professors was actually a leader of a political group there as well. So being able to talk to him, of course, outside of class and seeing his perspective, really, one, it definitely gave me something as an undergraduate, as a senior, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, what am I gonna do next year? I definitely want to go back and maybe do research at the West African Research Association. We actually met with the director at the Gore Institute, which is Gore Island, which is like a 10-15 minute boat ride, and just meeting with different NGOs there and really seeing how passionate they are about what goes on in Senegal. As a person who has not been to Africa since I was 5, I have a Nigerian father. For this to be my first as a young adult, it was definitely eye-opening, and I was very humbled by this experience because like the first presenter brought up, some of the things that we kind of take for granted as far as energy, electricity, constant food supply. My homestay mother, the first day I got there, my house was in complete blackness, and she was actually sending me out to get bread. 2 things I did not understand why all the lights were off, and I did not understand the Wolof word for bread. So, from there on, you just kind of had to, work it out. And, it was the little things, when people ask me, well, how was your experience? It's really hard to encapsulate it in one sentence. In one word, I would say amazing. But one thing I will say is being a college student, and I was taking classes at Suffolk University, but we actually met people from UCAD, which is the University of Cheikh Anta Diop, and I actually met some of the students there, and they were like inviting us to some of the protests. They were inviting us to African dance ceremonies. I witnessed a funeral and a birthing ceremony. And if I stayed 2 more weeks, a wedding. So just seeing how Senegalese people live in their day-to-day lives really opened my eyes to a completely different world. But in all of that difference, there were so many similarities. For instance, my homestay sister was a big Nicki Minaj fan. When the power went off, her cell phone, believe it or not, she had an iPhone, not the first one, the second one, and she would blast the Nicki Minaj throughout the house. And even though it was a Muslim family. So, it's really interesting, the comparisons and contrasts, and it was fun, and it was a learning experience, everything from hailing a cab to bargaining at the market to not being late to class because, the buses aren't ever on time, to just walking. And of course, learning Wolof was the biggest hurdle for me because I had zero Wolof experience, and I'm very confident in what I know. I'm actually trying to figure out how I'm going to maintain it. So when I go back next year, inshallah, I will be able to, incorporate the things that I've learned here and bring them, to help somebody else there. So, it definitely has shaped my goals as an African Studies scholar as far as what I want to do as I move forward. That's about it.
Well, we have questions. I'm sure you have questions. Yes, we'll give the
I don't have a
audience
fancy
an opportunity
presentation.
to ask you questions.
Okay.
I'm always fascinated by the way, Africanness permeates through religion. Africans with Christianity, Africans with Islam.
Mm-hmm.
So what you mentioned captured my attention when you said, although she happens to be a Muslim, but she was blasting this and that. So would you speak to that about how, these are here the people, because here in the West, especially in the West, when we hear, recently, of course, Islam associated with this and that type of behavior, a propensity to listen to this music and not that,
Right.
to dress like this and not like that. So please explain, because it seems to me these people are African first, then
Yes.
Muslim.
I agree with you 100%. I will say, because I was in a Muslim family, I got a chance to see the diversity within the Islam religion. Because, like you said, here it's just all pigeonholed, and you're like, oh, they're wearing these things on their head, and that's all people really know. But living there, they had call for prayer, but they lived like, anybody else. There wasn't this humongous difference that I feel like in the Western world that we make. They have to eat, and they went to school and everything. But there was definitely diversity amongst the ages and the gender, because you would see one of my friends, she was actually my next door neighbor in my neighborhood. I lived in Melrose, and she is Muslim, but she does not wear a headscarf. If me and her were standing here, you couldn't be like, oh, she's Muslim. You wouldn't know, And so I think, with that being said, you already said it, they're African first. And the issues and the problems that affect Africa. They don't affect Christian Africans or Muslim Africans. They affect Africa. And some of the things that the first presenter brought up, it doesn't matter what their religion is. And seeing that firsthand and living with a Muslim family definitely widened my scope. Because, I know a lot about different religions in Africa from an academic sense. But when you're waking up to the call of prayer at 4:30 every morning, and you can't get any closer to experiencing that and seeing, that level of devotion. It's more than just I'm Muslim. Especially as you get older. My Wolof teacher was a second wife, and I actually had the privilege of having dinner with her and discussing her stance on being a second wife, and she blew my mind because I, of course,
She what?
blew my mind because I had my own kind of suppositions, my own assumptions, and actually talking to her and seeing where she was in the context of her society, in the context of her community, you really have a level of respect and understanding when you do things like this and you live it and you see it live.
Question, do you have a chance to travel outside of the car?
Yes, we went to the jazz festival. We probably went there in San Luis. We went to Tubac Diallo, which had this amazing eco-friendly resort. And that's about it. Oh, we went to La Cruz. Yeah.
My question is about, you talked about how there was some unrest in the environment while you were there. My question is about the communication. How were people getting information there that you could see? Radio.
All day long. I mean, you could walk into a market, and I'm talking about like a group of people selling something at a place, into a house at our university, radio, word of mouth, and newspapers. Oh.
Senegal has always been like a big capital of African music, used to know, Afro-Blonde,
Yes.
But more recently, I was hoping to hear about it, more about it earlier on, but hip-hop, this medium, it's a big medium amongst the youth especially, what can you speak about the effects, of it among the youth and actually conscientizing the youth, and most importantly, the role of ACOM, Senegal's favorite son, in that, in his effect or level.
Okay, speaking of Big Time, he has a great club called Duplex. But as far as the music, we went to a few concerts at the French Institute, and what I will say is, unlike what I feel American hip hop is, their hip hop is like a movement. Because it's not only just about listening to the music and identifying with American hip hop, but some of the rappers are really talking about changing Senegal and things that youth, people my age and up, can do in their own small way, because there's a lot of disconnect between the young and the old, and that's very apparent when you see that even though I was American, I was still I'm still a female and I'm still in a Muslim household, so there were things that I had to do, as far as having that certain amount of respect for my elders. Even though my Wolof was not good, I was still taught how to say things to my elders versus saying things to, someone my age or my colleague. And I think that sometimes that space between the youth and elders, there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of misunderstanding, because you have people my age that don't feel like they can do anything in Senegal. I went to Suffolk University, which is actually a school in Boston, and they have a program where after 2 years, they can automatically come to Boston and go to school. And I was asking some of them, well, why didn't you just go to UCAD? And they were like, well, we want to go to America because, my dad is this and my mom is this, and I don't want to do that anymore. So when you listen to the songs and you listen to the hip hop, it's definitely live, and you see, college students. It's no different than an ASU concert. They're just speaking in French and Wolof, but they get live, they get active, and you really connect with it. I think from my vantage point, now someone a little older might not really appreciate it, but I think that was really the purpose of hip hop and throughout Africa. Is a movement.
Actually, yesterday I got a when I came back, I was receiving my voicemail, and there was a message from somebody who is organizing the tour of this Yanamar, the group that you were referring to, this group of young hip hop artists, who are very much active right now behind that June 23rd movement. Okay, they're in the United States right now, actually in Washington. So I'm going to respond to him. They're trying to come to Howard here. I don't know when exactly, but we're gonna try to organize it and get them here. I'll work with you guys to try and facilitate that, Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Great, yes, you did.
Wow, what wonderful summers you guys have had. Our final speaker is also a senior in the Department of African Studies. He's leaving us, I don't know what we're going to do next year. Ms. Mekeda Njoroge. And she participated in the Public Policy and International Affairs program at the University of California, Berkeley this summer, and has probably a lot of insights and reflections on that program and how that helped shape her ideas about what she wants to do in the future. So she too was a PPIA fellow, which is again one of these very prestigious programs that we were so delighted that she was able to receive. So Mekeda, I'll turn it to you.
Hello everyone. Like Dr. Johnson said, my name is Mekeda. So I participated in UC Berkeley's Public Policy and International Affairs program. I was a fellow there, and what the goal of the program is to introduce students of color to the public policy arena and to get them prepared to go to graduate school, and specifically to go and receive a master's in public policy and then work in the public policy arena, whether it's local government, state, or federal. It's a really good award. It helps you tremendously with funding for graduate school. If you're going for an MPP, they have a list of consortium schools that have a lot of, that their focus is masters in public policy, and it's really good funding. It was a really good experience. The classes, so it wasn't just kind of like I was there and I was doing just a whole bunch of things. I took classes. I took a class in statistics, which was an eye-opening experience. I'm not a math person, and statistics is a challenge. I took a class in economics, and then I also took a class in public policy. And I applied for their law fellowship, so I was also a law fellow. So we weren't being graded in our law class, but what we did do was we had a list of some of their law professors come and talk to us on a range of issues, from environmental justice to criminal law to immigration law. So let me see, where else was I going? All right, classes. So some of the strengths of the programs were that, like I said, it was a really good opportunity for students of color to learn about public policy and to also see what other young students of color are doing, because we had students from all over. Most of the people were from the West Coast, but you had people from the South, there was people from the East Coast, and it was a really good opportunity for me to see people my age who looked like me and who were from other different ethnic backgrounds, and to see what their what their motivations are, what their interests are, and how everything kind of all connected. And then I also realized the importance of having a quantitative background or understanding statistics, because I didn't realize how much of a role it played in public policy. And now I can look at a policy report, or when someone makes a policy recommendation, and I can really look at it and be well, yeah, your numbers say this, but what is this really saying? Or really breaking it down, does it take into account the full context in which issues take place? And another strength was that it helped me to better understand government and how government works, and how people who work in government work and what they do and how they assess issues. Because two of my main motivations for participating in the program were, one was that I've done a lot of community development work, and I'm interested in community development. And I kind of have like a good foundation of how development works on the ground, in the grassroots arena. And I wanted to understand how it worked in the government, like how do government officials see the same issues of like HIV/AIDS in low-income communities or poverty in low-income communities? How do they look at it versus how I've seen it on the ground? And then my second motivation was, well, it's kind of, I'm really interested in like this whole idea of good governance for Africa and democracy and all this stuff. So I kind of wanted to go because I wanted to see like, okay, you know, what is this idea, what is this governance and democracy that Africa and developing nations so desperately need? Like, what is it all about? You know, like what does it look like in America, you know? So those are my two motivations. I think one of the most problematic things that I had with, not necessarily the program, but with the perspective in public policy is that it's very Western. And people are very out of touch with what is really going on. So like right now I'm at the Center for Women Policy Studies, and you see that like even in welfare reform, like one of the main components of welfare today for women who receive welfare, single mothers, is like, instead of like job training or post-secondary education, it's go and get a job. Look at the economy right now. How can you get a job? You know, so why as an analyst or as a public policy maker would you make people who are low income go and get a job or spend all their time trying to find a job when there's so many other things that this program can be doing? And so I find that people are like really out of touch with what's going on. One of our professors in our, we had international economics class, and he made a statement, you know, to the degree of like, you know, we always talk about developing nations, always talk about colonization and the colonizer, and you know, when are they going to take responsibility for themselves, and when are they going to like, you know, help themselves? And so I find that like it's problematic because these are the people that are making policies that really influence people's lives, and it really helped me to understand that there are whole continents of people who are treated just like the people who are at the bottom of society here. Like the policy and the stance that a lot of people, that is taken towards a lot of people, and this out of touchness when trying to make policy for people of color, low income people, whatever here, that's kind of like the same attitude that people have towards developing nations. And so that was just an issue. That was one of the, I guess, the most problematic things for me. And I thought I wanted to go into public policy. I'm still considering it, but I don't know that I'll be able to do the things or make the changes that I want to make when I guess the perspective is so narrow about what development is, I guess what even progress is, even in America. Like what is it about, you know? Because I think that people have such like narrow perspectives of like what things are about. We had to do a policy analysis for Micronesia. So there's an extremely high dropout rate in Micronesia. And so our policy analysis professor wanted us to, or not professor, but teacher, he wanted us to do a policy briefing on the problem, like diagnose what the problem is. And the main thrust of that was he kind of wanted to show us that a lot of times when people go into developing nations and want to say like, oh, this is what the problem is, instead of actually sitting back, taking a step back and looking at what the problem is, people just come up with all these recommendations without actually taking a very holistic approach and looking at what challenges developing nations face. And so my group took the approach that colonization and the effects of colonization was what was the problem. It was a major challenge in Micronesia because you have like these two very polarized groups of people in Micronesia. You have people who really are upset that they've been colonized, and they've been colonized by the U.S., by Germany, by Japan. Like and it's been like throughout a major portion of their history has been colonization, and so it really affects them. And then the U.S., they were like the last people to kind of come in. They had a policy of slow growth, so there's a lot of like problems with their economy, with their educational system, and it really ties into colonization. And so that was like our approach. And then there's also another people in Micronesia who are like, no, we need to follow the West, we need to follow industrialization, we need to go and get education in America and be capitalistic. And these groups, it's very much apparent like there's an issue of a national identity. And that was one of the things that we were saying was like, before we start to talk about like education and because even in school, people are dropping out because the stuff doesn't relate, you know? Like if I'm in school, if you're a Micronesian and you're learning about, stuff that has nothing, you're learning about stuff with the U.S. and it has nothing to do with you, then what is the motivation for you to even be in school? school. So those are the types of things that we kind of wanted to bring out in our presentation. And we got some good feedback, but it was also it was very disconcerting that some of the judges were like, well, we don't understand why you're talking about colonization. Colonization is a thing of the past. Why are you still, that's not really the issue anymore. The main issue now is we need to talk about the present and stuff like that. And so it'd be hard for me to, I guess, go into a field or an area where my perspective is very different. I'm a woman of color, and I'm an African woman. And in studying African studies here, I have my perspective on things is very much different from, it's not Western. And so for me to like go into a field where like the perspective is like, oh, there's kind of like only one way to do things, and it's this way, it would be hard for me to do that. So, but I also know that it's very needed. Like they need people who actually don't have that perspective to go in, because if it's domestic or if it's international, people who really understand what's going on, who can look at things in context, and who can relate to the people who policy is being made for are needed in the policy arena. So, but overall, I would definitely recommend the program to students who are, it's a program for your summer of your junior year, going into your senior year, and I would recommend it because it was a really good experience. It was a good networking experience. It's a good way to understand, I guess, it was good exposure to public policy and what it actually was all about and what it entailed prior to going to get a master's or going to try and get into the field and not really knowing specifically what it was. So, yeah, that was my experience.
Thank you.
Take some questions for Michaela.
Just a brief question. Just with your interactions with your cohort, I know this summer where I was at, it was like half of us were at HBCUs and half were at like PWIs, Columbia, things like that. And our approaches and our thoughts on things were very different. I was wondering if you ran into the same thing, and how exactly were you able to, on certain issues, come to or meet in the middle?
Mm-hmm.
How did that work out?
So, yeah, it was, most of the people who actually were in the program were from PWIs. It was myself, I'm Howard, and two young ladies who were spelling, and then everybody else was from predominantly white school. But I wouldn't necessarily say that there was a divide between like the people who were from HBCUs and the people who were from PWIs, because one of the ladies who I got to know like very well, who ended up becoming one of my closest friends, who had like the exact same perspectives I had, she goes to UC Berkeley, So it was interesting. There were definitely, it was an interesting discussion, we had interesting discussions in class, because we had this one student who, he wouldn't acknowledge that like racism existed, or that, he was like, racial profiling, if you get arrested 5 times, you get pulled over 5 times and I get pulled over 3 times, the probability of either one of us going to jail is 0 because we did nothing wrong, and it was interesting. We definitely had, there were people from who, but then again, I think it even just showed me that like, if you don't experience it, then it doesn't exist to you, Like if you've never known racism, and you never experienced the harsh reality that racism creates for people, then, it doesn't even, like, it's not, then I understood better why people have that approach, or like, it's not that bad, or, it's not that, but we definitely had some people who were like myself, I was very, anti, corporations are doing good things for developing nations, structural adjustment programs are really great for developing nations, and we definitely had a good group of, there was a group of people who were, because a lot of the students there were Latino, and a lot of them were Latino from Mexico, and so a lot of them were like, yeah, corporations don't do good things, like multinational corporations have issues, one problem I think I did notice was a lot of the professors and a lot of the, even our guest lecturers, they really tried to take a centrist approach and avoid race. So even we have like a policy module about black male incarceration, and we never talk about racism. Like how do you even have that discussion when you don't talk about racism? Like that's integral. Like how does that even like happen? And so, because I think one of, like even myself or somebody else raised, I hear like, do you think racism plays a factor in this? And like, well, yeah, I think so. It might. Yeah, you know, so it was, we definitely, and then you had some people in the class who were like, oh, well, you know, I don't think people are trying to play the race card. And then you had some people who were like, no, the whole stack of cards is race, you know, like, the whole deck is race cards. So it was interesting, but I don't think it was that, like, HBCU, PWI divide. There were people in predominantly white schools who had the same perspectives that a lot of people here would have. And then there were, you know, for the most part, I would say like both the young ladies who were from HBCUs did though share a lot of the same perspectives that I did. So, but it was very interesting discussions.
Okay, I think there's actually two questions. The first is that your summer, did you work on any African-related project? The second of all, did you travel outside Berkeley? Maybe did you get to go to see Los Angeles, some of the poor areas of Los Angeles or San Francisco to do some field work?
Okay, so no, I didn't get to work specifically on an African project, which I wanted to, but I realized after I got there that Berkeley really is more domestic public policy than it is international. So we did have, like, in our law modules, we had like humanitarian law. We had we had a discussion on international economics. And then we talked about Africa in that sense, but there wasn't really a strong emphasis on international affairs. We did, Los Angeles is like 6 hours away from where we were, so we didn't get to go to Los Angeles, but we did get to go to visit San Francisco, and we got to visit Oakland. And Oakland was one of my more memorable experiences because I don't know if everyone is like familiar with Oscar Grant, but we went there and we had like the current police chief in Oakland. He was discussing the case and he was talking about changing the culture of, I guess, the police, the way police interact with people in the community, because Oakland police have like historically had a heavy hand with the people, and the people in Oakland are primarily people of color. And so Oscar Grant, we all went into, because I was like, you know, I've heard of him, but I wasn't really sure like who Oscar Grant was. And Oscar Grant was an African American young man who was on the train with some of his friends, and he was going through, I guess he's going through an area that probably wasn't, you know, predominantly people of color. And somebody called like the police and said they're making noise, they're rowdy and such and such. And so the Metro police, or not Metro, but the transit police came, they came and pulled them off the train and ended up arresting them. And what happened was they handcuffed them, like they were all handcuffed and on the ground. The policeman pulled out his gun and shot Oscar in the back of the head. Just like cold blood, like he just pulled his, like, because he was already, you know, like apprehended. He had his, because he tried to say that like Oscar Grant was like talking back to him or mouthing off or something. And then like after he shot him, he came out and said like, oh, I didn't know I was reaching for my gun, I thought I was reaching for my taser. And yeah, just shot him in cold blood in the back of the head and got something like 2 years or something like that. And then he was released. So it was a really big issue because like even all around Oakland, you still saw like all these pictures of Oscar Grant all over the place. Like people had pictures, like people, like the community was really upset. Like there was a lot of, I guess, movement behind that because it really highlighted the problem that Oakland City Police, that Oakland people have with the police department and the racism that still exists. So.
Other questions?
It seems to me that you came away from such a rich experience. You know, I envy you. Like, it was good. It seems like you came away with a very healthy suspicion of the orthodoxy. You know, if you didn't have it before. You know, like, you know, people always say that's why it's always frustrated me too. With policy studies, especially when people are looking at Africa and solutions. You know, the scientific method. You know, the rejection of context as how you should inform policy and things like that, structure, especially in South Africa. You know, the complete rejection of, you know, apartheid past that should inform policy now, and which causes problems, which basically prolongs problems. But anyway, you were like a quote-unquote liberal ground zero, right, Berkeley? So explain to us like how, like, you know, domestic progressives, you know, the academia and so forth. There's so many things that they have in common with what you have just talked about, you know, people of color, or as far as like certain causes that people of color are likely to espouse, you know, like justice and things like that, social justice. But then sometimes you find that there's a point where you part ways when you are talking about certain things. Did you find that at Berkeley when you were just looking around and hearing the conversations in different forums. Like, okay, I can feel that, but not that.
Yeah. That's interesting because that was probably like a daily discussion that I had with some of my colleagues in the program. Berkeley is known to be the liberal ground zero, as you put it, but the reality is actually, in my opinion, is a lot different from what the school espouses. Even like daily interactions with students, I'm from the East Coast, and I know like people from the South are like people from the Northeast are really rude, but there were some people who I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is the West Coast. 5 minutes we about to fight. Like, why are you trying to, there's a lot of like people. It's supposed to be liberal, but there's a lot of like even on the campus, like the race relations is very interesting because like you have a lot of people who have these perceptions of Black people as like being like dangerous or being like like there's like an apprehension with Black people, or even with people of color. And then as far as like the academic, the academics are concerned, like I said, it was very centrist, which surprised me because it really didn't surprise me, but it was a very centrist. People took a very centrist approach. So even when we talked about incarceration, like how are you having like you've written all these articles, you're writing this, but your primary research is incarceration, and we're not talking about racism, or you can call it whatever you want. I find that a lot of people kind of they shy away from like the issues that are real, let's have like a very beat around the bush conversation about like what is going on, and that was problematic for me because I think that was a reflection of like public policy, because it was like we can't beat around the bush, and this is no like to discredit Berkeley or discredit the program because the program really was good, and there were some professors are amazing at what they do, but even let me see, I guess another what would be another example? We were having a conversation about students and low achievement among students of color. We were talking about standardized tests, and like people were like, well, the test is not that there's a problem with the test. The test works the way it's supposed to work. Like it's supposed to. I guess the perspective was kind of like, well, the problem is like that communities of color or poor people, they don't have the resources that they need. Yes. But it's not just racism. There's other things that go on too. There's a lot of mixing of like, it's not racism, it's poverty. And I think that if you're a person of color, you understand that poverty, first of all, a lot of people of color are poor. But I think that you understand that you can't I think in some way just making it just about poverty and ignoring race, I think it diminishes the experience that people of color have had. And it diminishes the claims that are real. Racism is real, And so I think people take there was a very middle of the path, like even though, freedom, liberation, all that stuff, but to a point, it was only to a point, that's what it was. I don't know, and I think that's a reflection even of our government, like with Obama. Has Obama talked about poverty? You're supposed to be this, liberal president and all this stuff. I don't really hear too much going on. With Troy Davis, who was executed yesterday, the news was talking about it. Did the news talk about race at all? What did the news say? The news was like, this is such a, this just shows how, how people who are poor really have a hard time in the criminal justice system, and people who are, like, this is about racism. That's what this is about. I don't care, the bottom line, this is about racism. However you want to call it, whatever you want to say, this is about racism. Like, there's too much doubt in this case for you to convict this man or even execute this man. Nobody talked about, it's about poverty. It's about class. It's not about race. Instead of it being a mixture of the two and having an open and honest conversation about race. So I thought that it was very middle of the ground. My long-winded answer.
No, very good. Any other questions? You want to say something, Nana? You might be almost wrapping up. Say something. No, I want to thank all of our presenters, all of our students who really obviously had really wonderful summer experiences, and I'm just really delighted to hear about to turn it over to, I think, Wheeler to just, I guess, wrap up and then send us on our way.
Let's give a hand to the cabinet. And all of our friends. They did an excellent job, thank you. Most of you know that this program is a program for African Studies, but what most of you don't know is the role that our distinguished Dr. Mbai Chan has played in this. And so if anyone needs to be thanked, it is, he needs to be thanked for just the ideas, the concepts, the finding most of the presenters. It really was his work. So thank you, Dr. Chan, for
Your work.
and your guidance. And your guidance in the program. And I want to thank all of you for coming. Please tell your friends about it. This information and the presentations and the summary will be on the website. I'll send you links to it if you've signed in. If you haven't signed in and if you have not been receiving emails from me, please make sure you sign this attendance sheet. That lets me know who's here. We will send you additional information on the sessions that are coming up. There are at least 3 sessions that we are working on right now that are not on the sheet. So the way you're going to find out is you're going to be on the email list. There are like 2 or 3 coming up very quickly. So the idea is that we have opportunities to discuss the issues, trends that are pertinent to Africa today. And sometimes those issues come up pretty quickly. So please make sure I have your email address. Thank you for coming. Tell your friends, and we'll see you on the 29th. Thank you.